You're live.
Welcome, everybody, to the inaugural episode of the Affordable Homeownership Roundtable. Wanted to start by giving everyone a reason why we're here, what we're going to be talking about, and how it impacts you as a current or potential homeowner. What we've seen at an accelerating pace in the last year, really post-COVID, is decisions are being made in Washington, D.C. that impact your ability to buy or own or control or finance your home without input from consumers. It's truly top-down government fiat saying this is how things are and we've decided what's best for you. And it really doesn't have a lot to do with what's best for the consumer. So our reason for being here is to discuss these topics in detail so that you as a consumer can understand them and what they mean and how it's impacting your homeownership rights and abilities. And what we can do about it. Our strong hope is that we will be able to aggregate the voice of homeowners who are not being heard right now and magnify that voice in Washington, D.C. and on the state level so that we can impact change and affect change for you. Homeownership has the greatest impact on wealth in America of any other investment or asset you can own. It is important that we make it available to as many people as possible, and it's getting out of reach, and we have policies that are making it more out of reach than it should be. So with that, Scott's going to go around the table here and introduce the six of us. We all became introduced here in the last year or so, and as COVID sort of jumped off and we saw forbearance issues, CARES Act, changes to what you can do in terms of refinancing. We've been having this call every other week. Everyone on this call has a heart for homeowners and helping people. I don't think anyone on this call has been in this industry for less than 20 years. So we've seen the great impact that it can have on people, and we're seeing some really bad trends of what's being done, short-sighted decisions in Washington, D.C. and on the state level that are impacting you. So with that, let me throw it over to Scott, and we kind of go through some introductions so you can hear who we are, what our background is, and then let's talk about what we can do to make things better.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. Yeah, we kicked this off. I was looking, it's probably been a full year now. So when the CARES Act passed, we put together a resource to kind of educate, because literally overnight, 4 million consumers were told to stop making their mortgage payments. And that was just a policy that somebody thought, hey, this is a good thing, this is a necessary thing. And there's arguments on either side, absolutely. But then what are the unintended consequences of that decision? And we created a feedback loop. We created a website for consumers to give feedback on what their experience is after they've made it through COVID and they're trying to get back and making their payments on time. And it's an absolute mess. The policy decision-making seemed to have stopped with just let them stop making their payments. And then nobody thought about, well, what's the aftermath and what happens after that? And that's kind of what kicked off this conversation. So my name is Scott Chang, and I'm partners with Josh Lewis. We run a website that's been up for a little bit over a decade called findmywayhome.com. And we try to educate and empower consumers about kind of what's going on in the market. We started it after the crash, quite literally to help people recover after 2008 and get back into homes and back into home ownership. And then Brian View introduced us to a couple of the gentlemen on here. And again, over the last year, these conversations have been so enlightening to me personally that it finally got to the point where we said we have to have these conversations in public and get more people involved in this conversation, because it's more important than ever. And Phil's been around for a couple of days in this business, and he has some comments on the state of the business right now, and it really is a critical time. So I guess with that, I'll go across the board, and Phil, can you introduce yourself and who you are and why you're here?
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Josh. Phil Bracken. I am the chairman and founder of an organization called the America's Homeowner Alliance, and we'll be talking more about that in a moment. Thank you, Scott, for popping that up for me. This organization, by the way, let me just go back for a little bit. This is my 45th year in this industry and in this marketplace, and I put that stake in the ground so that my colleagues won't say 145 years. So the purpose of this roundtable and for these discussions is to give value to you so that you understand somebody cares and somebody is working on your behalf. The reason that my good colleague, friend, and colleague Tino Diaz and I started the America's Homeowner Alliance is because we recognized that there was no association, no group, no voice representing the 75 million existing homeowners of America and the 25 million aspiring homeowners. So we designed an organization, filed a patent and trademark and service mark, and created it about 10 years ago. It's a nonprofit organization. Joining it is free. We'll talk more about that in a moment. And it has become the voice of the people so that we can actually make a change on policy issues in Washington that matter to all of you. And why don't I just pause there and let Tino and Brian and Eric introduce themselves, and then we'll come back to this.
Tino?
Well, so my name is Tino Diaz, of course, as you can see it there, and I'm the eldest in here. I want you to know that I've been in the business for 46 years. So I'm the antiquity.
You just had to one-up Phil, I see.
Yeah. But I'm the antiquity. The thing is, I love this business. I love what happens to families when they buy their own place and when they plant roots on the ground. I'm an immigrant to this country. I came when I was 9 years old, and we came here looking for freedom. One of the basic things that the founders of this nation wanted to do was to ensure that not only that the right to private property was secured, the most important of which was your own life. So life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, life. But the other thing that they made sure that they put into the law, the Constitution, is that we had the right to property. And the basic property that they worried about was land, because land represented sustenance for the family. There was a way to have a better life. It still is today, my friends. If you ask any mayor, tell me where's the safest place in town, where's the best health in town, and what's the nicest place to live where there's a whole lot of goods and services you'd like to avail yourself of, I'll bet you anything that 99% of the time they're going to point to where there's a huge concentration of homeowners. Life is better where there are homeowners who are planted in that community, who believe in their ownership, who take responsibility, and with that comes a better life, not just for them, but for everybody around them. Home ownership not only is the bedrock of that, okay, it also builds wealth, but the real wealth of America is in the right to that property, the freedom that you have to own what's yours, to do with it as you will, and to protect your family and provide a better life for your family. That is at the bedrock. That's the real wealth of America. And that is being threatened today because less and less of us have an opportunity to own our own place because of these policies that are being passed. It's bad policy. And unfortunately, it's having a terrible effect on us and our families that want to own a place. I see a lot of good, decent, hardworking people who want to have a place of their own, and they just cannot get it. Not because they're incapable of owning or they don't have the skills to do that, but because it's not available as a result of policy. And so we have to reverse this to bring back that real wealth of America, the real wealth, our ability to build safe, attractive, and great places to live. And that's why I'm in this.
I love it. Man,
Brother Brian.
That's a tough one to follow. It's awesome story, Tino. So hello, I'm Brian View, President and COO of Finlocker. I've been with Finlocker for just about 2 years. Finlocker is a relatively young company. We're a fintech, and we focus on empowering consumers with financial health, literacy, and well-being, but also empowering consumers to leverage their own data for their benefit in a financial transaction. And in the context of our conversation on this series, it'll be all about home ownership and the financing for home ownership. So a little bit, similar to Tino in terms of talking about land, as gold back in the day. There's a lot of talk today about data and consumer data being the new gold, right? And it's really what we do at Finlocker is really help consumers not only understand their data, but able to use their data in a way that benefits them and not some other financial institution. So that's really the crux of what we do. I've spent, before coming to Finlocker, I spent nearly 3 decades in mortgage banking, in kind of frontline mortgage originations, working with folks like Josh and Scott to provide liquidity and a source of a product for loans to get delivered to, and so I've seen many of the cycles. Like everybody on this panel lived through the crisis. I was at an institution that did not make it through the crisis, so I could speak to it from a personal impact perspective. I lost a job in the crisis, and I was in the lending industry, right? So the mission of this group, the conversations we've been having for the last year is near and dear, and I'm honored to be part of such a great group of folks that are focused on helping and solve the problems that exist in our housing industry. Glad to be here.
Thank you, Brian. And quite frankly, the reason for the crash was bad policy, and there were no conversations around that.
Yeah.
So hopefully we can head that off. Now, Eric, I first met you right after the crash, and you are very, very close to policymakers. And introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your background and why you're here.
Thank you, Scott, and thank you, everyone, for allowing me to speak today. So, yeah, as Scott said, I worked a lot during the last crisis. I worked with lots of states. I worked with lots of mortgage companies. I used to run a nonprofit. And really, yeah, there is so much impact from government, and I think that's hopefully you're going to be able to understand how these things fit together, because from the local level, sometimes we're not really sure why things are the way they are. And it's a series of rules. It's a structure. It's a framework that gets set up. And then the finance industry fits within that in certain ways. Quite often, as Scott was saying, during the crisis, there was a lot of work that needed to be done to help consumers. And I got to see a lot in terms of government action and private industry action that did help homeowners, but also sometimes harmed homeowners. We are in an incredible market right now. I mean, I have family who've been trying to buy a house and they can't buy, and they are approved for a loan. So it's real to me. I understand how these things go, and it's got to be very, very frustrating to people who are looking to purchase. And so hopefully we'll be able to put a lot of that information together for you through these phone calls. And then as you have questions, please reach out. There is a message box, right, Scott? People can write in their questions.
Yes, there is a comment. If you're watching this on, I think, YouTube or Facebook, you can leave a question and we can address that.
Yep. Yep. And as Scott said, there's the forbearances, which we'll talk about, the forbearances and how all that works. I think there's a lot of education. Generally speaking, if you have questions, I would say get the process started, because in terms of federal policy, all that's going to be coming to an end very soon. And so you need to have a plan. You need to start thinking ahead. If you're not ready to make payments and you are not employed, and questions, we can certainly go over what some of those options could look like. But there is a lot that's sort of been, I would say, sort of imposed on the market due to policy. And we're going to start figuring that out here real soon. So in terms of a country, because we just have to. So that's where we are right now.
Thank you, Eric. Yeah, so as Eric mentioned, if you're watching this live, you can ask questions or leave comments on Facebook or YouTube. If you're watching the recording of this, still leave comments or questions because we'll address them next time. And our goal here is to kind of come with a different topic of focus every 2 weeks. We'll put together a topic that we're going to focus on and unpack. In a perfect world, we're talking to some policymakers in the future and getting them on this roundtable and potentially having them join this conversation and talk to us about what it's like from a policymaker's perspective and what kind of pressures they have to deal with and what kind of channels are available to them. Now, Phil, I'd like to circle back with you because before we went live, again, I want to reiterate the reason we're doing this is we're trying to rally behind the organization that Phil and Tino have created, which is America's Homeowner Alliance. And again, the reason we're doing this is to get more voices together.
No, right there.
Yeah, I know. But Brian gets covered up every time.
That's all right.
That's good. So I'll have to sneak it in there.
It's good.
Phil, you were talking before we went on air about why this is so important. Do you mind going back into some of the things that have evolved like recently that you think is really making a big impact right now?
Happy to do so, Scott, and thank you to Josh and Eric and Brian and Tino for their wisdom and their insight on these difficult issues. For all of you listening on the phone or on this roundtable today, there are lots of history lessons, but most importantly, as Tino mentioned, we're at this because everyone who is capable and has a passion to be a homeowner in America should get the opportunity. And it is unacceptable and unsustainable that policy that comes from policymakers in Washington are currently impinging that opportunity for many of you. And whether it's access to home ownership through credit impingement or not being able to get access to products or services or lenders, it's incumbent on us to protect that opportunity for you. If it's today, unfortunately, by the way, let me just tell you that we have the statistics. We can actually post those for you maybe next week. The average net worth historically of a homeowner is nearly 60 times greater than that of a renter. And it's just historically, that's where the greatest generational wealth is framed in the United States. And we want to be able to provide everyone that opportunity. And frankly, right now we've reached rent saturation in America because the ability to get access to home ownership has been made so much more difficult because of these policies in Washington and in the states. There are so many more renters today than there were just 10 years ago, and we've reached rent saturation. And when you reach rent saturation, it means that people have less disposable income because rent costs keep going up, and there's no way to protect against it. The best way to protect against it is to have a fixed rate long-term mortgage where you can actually budget and plan, etc. But again, policies are in place right now that are just impinging that opportunity. We're going to focus on a couple of those in a moment. But I also wanted to just mention, I'm sure many of you recognize that single-family residential homes for sale in America have been, the number of single-family homes available for sale have been declining every quarter since the end of 2010. And that's when you think about that, when you think about the housing need of America. If there were not enough shoes in America, policymakers would find a way to make enough shoes so that kids could have shoes. There aren't enough homes. And policymakers are not paying attention to the fact that we are about 5 million units behind the household formation of the last 10 years. And because of that inventory shortage, it makes demand for homeownership trying to meet a limited supply. And that's why housing prices are escalating so badly. Well, so wonderfully if you're a homeowner, but not so wonderfully if you're an aspiring homeowner. And there are plenty of policy things that could be done. In fact, we've written a paper that we'll be talking about here in one of our upcoming episodes about how to fix the single-family residential housing inventory shortage. We've written a white paper about the 7 solutions, and there are easy solutions for policymakers. In fact, if we were the czars of housing in America, we would have solved it for you already. But we're not the czars. It is our intention to create enough voice so that you become the czar. And that's why, building this coalition, this America's Homeowner Alliance, it's a nonprofit organization. You go online, you join the organization, and the idea is for us to be able to use that voice directly to policymakers to tell them that you're not meeting the need. We must do something different. And I'll give you 2 more examples. Just last year, one of the government agencies just decided out of the blue sky that they're going to start charging people during COVID. Can you imagine this? During the COVID crisis, when 60 million people had lost their job, and people were trying to refinance their home just for sustenance. I need the money to live on. I need the money to help my parents live, to send my kids to college, whatever it may be. And a government agency decided, I'm just going to start charging 50 basis points more. That's a kind of a technical term. It means we just can charge people more because we can, and nobody's going to stop us. So they institute a program to charge anybody that wants to refinance their home and take cash out to sustain themselves through the crisis. Well, thank God we had enough momentum and enough energy and enough voice of the people to get that reversed. And so about 2 months ago, we finally got that policy wiped out. And so things like that where a government agency just out of the sky decides they can charge people more because they want to, not because they need to, it's because they wanted to. And it's not right, it's not fair, and we were able to stop it.
Phil, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I don't want to gloss over the fact that public pressure is what created that, and America's Homeowner Alliance had a big part of that, gathering signatures from its members and sending it in front of policymakers and putting pressure on some of these policymakers and just letting them know that consumers are not okay with these types of broad policies, that they're not being thought out. So that is a perfect example right there of exactly why we're doing what we're doing today, because as these things come down the pipe and we identify those things, we want to be able to have this huge voice that we can say, all right, guys, we've got to mobilize in this area. Let's cause a stink about this bad decision and see if we can get it reversed. Right. And you played a role in that, and that's a significant example of what we're talking about.
And I think one of the things we can talk about here, it's a political issue, but it's not a partisan issue. This isn't conservative, liberal, left, right. It doesn't matter. Largely, the decisions that we're talking about is that we have all politicians in Washington, D.C. very removed from their constituents and how this is impacting them. Decisions are being made without understanding. I want to say without concern, but I don't believe that people truly don't have concern for their constituents. They don't have understanding for the impact that this issue is having. They're not seeing what we see on the street. We see, I do a big YouTube live every Wednesday, and we hear people around the country every week saying, oh, in my area, it's crazy. There's so many offers and home prices are so high. And I say, what area are you in? And they say, guess what? It doesn't matter. Whether you're in Denver, you're in Florida, you're in Maine, we don't talk to anyone anywhere that says, oh, my area is cool, plenty of homes. I'm sure there are a few micro markets in the country that are not impacted, but for the most part, every metropolitan area in the country is impacted by affordability issues, high home prices, limited supply, bidding wars, investors trying to purchase properties and squeezing out actual occupant owners, rents going higher. We've got CARES Act forbearance. We've got rent moratoriums. There's so many things here that impact. And when we talk about Phil Lentino's program at America's Homeowners Alliance, it's important for you to get involved. They are offering a free membership. We're trying to aggregate as many voices as possible of people who are impacted. And who's impacted? Every American is impacted by this. We're trying to aggregate those voices so we can speak more loudly so that Republicans and Democrats, people of all persuasions in all locations, all of the politicians in Washington, D.C. understand what we're talking about and how it's impacting Americans of all stripes and how we can change it for the better. There are some simple and obvious things. As Scott had said, with this, some weeks we're just going to be talking about topics and potential solutions. We hope to have guests and actual real politicians who have some impact on this so we can have a dialogue and a conversation. And again, as everyone said here, put your comments here, whether you're watching now live, whether you're watching this recorded, comments, questions, any thoughts you have. We want this to be a discussion where we're taking the conversation from the streets, the man on the street being impacted by this, and moving that conversation up the food chain to people who can actually impact and affect change.
And I also want to reiterate that this is not, again, this isn't a political thing at all. And I also don't think you never want to attribute to malice what you can attribute to ignorance. And I think you pointed this out, Josh. It's really that disconnect from being in Washington and not really understanding their constituents. I don't think anybody is out there trying to purposely make policy to hurt people, but I think that there's a lot of ignorance, and I don't think there's enough of a feedback loop from consumers or from concerned policymakers that don't have a dog in the race, right? I mean, and I think Phil pointed this out. That's really, really important. Is we're not talking about people or politics here. We're talking about policies.
Yeah,
we're just talking about ideas.
Let me just give two more examples that might impact the people watching this today. Just as another example, again, just to show this is in every community in America. It's not isolated to one particular place. There are 40 million people in America, adult consumers who have a job, that can't get a credit score today. And there are credit scoring models available in the marketplace that could score all 40 million of them. And it's just uncanny that policymakers that we don't have enough voice of the people right now to turn the attention of policymakers to simply say that's unacceptable. And unfortunately, the government agencies have restricted the use of these credit scoring models that could score these people, and won't let those models be used in the because they make the rules. That's unacceptable.
Why is the credit score important? Why is that?
Well, if you can't get a credit score, generally speaking, you can't get a mortgage. But it's more important than that. You can't get access to mainstream credit, and if you are left in the underworld of the financial services, you will pay more for everything that whether it's payday lending or same-day lending or any kind of underworld. You've got to have a credit score to get in the mainstream, so you can get polished and get in the rank and file position to just get normal services. That's one thing.
The other thing to think about real quick is when we're talking about credit, this credit model was built like before the internet. It's an old model. It's based on old assumptions. It's based on old consumption assumptions, and it hasn't been updated. It hasn't taken into consideration, multiple streams of income and different types of purchases and things like that. And to your point, Phil, that is one thing. So the policy now is you can only use certain credit scoring models that isolate millions of people from even having an opportunity to play the game, because they don't fit into this antiquated model that policy dictates that this number has to exist in order for you even to have access to home ownership.
And to that point, that's one of the reasons that we want to build a bigger voice, so that the consumer of America, through the America's Homeowner Alliance, can actually illuminate that for policymakers and point out that they are being underserved, and there are ways to serve them. And I think Josh was right. I don't think anybody really has is mean-spirited, and we need to focus their attention on these issues. I'll give you another one. The National Association of Home Builders just reported that the average regulatory and compliance cost to build the average home in America is $94,000 per home. We won't have affordable housing if the regulatory and compliance, that doesn't mean buying the land, buying the lumber, buying the appliances. It's just regulatory and compliance costs before they put the shovel in the ground. If we don't focus policymakers' attention on those things, those regulations and the compliance costs and things like that, one of our recommendations is Congress should form a commission. If they're really good at that, let's form a commission about this, that, whatever. Why don't we form a commission to cut those costs in half? And we want that done by the end of the year, right? But that won't happen without the voice of the people. And that's why this is not about Democrats or Republicans. It's not about left or right. It's not about Oklahoma versus Florida. This is about all these things that are impacting every consumer in America. And we just got to build a bigger voice and make policymakers accountable for making decisions and driving policy that will create the behavior that's necessary to meet the needs of the emerging population. And that's why we're doing these sessions, and that's why we want this to grow. So tell your friends and neighbors, all of you, that that's what this is about. We have to grow this network geometrically, and bigger is definitely better in this sector.
I want to go back to something that Josh brought up. You're talking about a lot of the decisions that have been made over time that have impact and kind of got us to this place today where we truly have this crisis, right? The crisis today is different than the crash. Today's crisis, there's just not enough inventory. We've already talked about people that are put on the sidelines, but Josh said that the decisions were not necessarily made out of malice, but it was lack of understanding. And a perfect example is forbearance. A year ago, 15 months now, or whatever it was, 14 months ago, we started this pandemic, and the concept of forbearance was brought into the industry. And at first blush, I don't think anybody would have thought that it was a bad idea, that people potentially are going to need help, because these were uncharted waters for all of us. But the unintended consequence of what's now become feels like unlimited forbearance is if I'm a homeowner and I'm 12 plus months into forbearance and maybe I got another 6 months in me, what's my motivation to sell my home and move and create an opportunity for someone to move into my home, right? And so we've kind of gridlocked a group of would-be home sellers because it's a math equation for them. I waited out for another 6 months or however long forbearance will be extended before I have to make a payment, and then I'll sell my house. So it's kind of kicking the can down the road. So again, I think none of us are saying that decisions being made on behalf of the citizens here in the country are made in malice. Well, mostly aren't made in malice. But there's a lack of thinking down the road of what the consequences of these decisions are. And that's kind of where we're at today.
Well, all of these things are incredibly complex. And that's the problem, is there are so many moving parts, and all the moving parts don't always talk to each other. And so there's that lack of communication when you have so many people all working on a small piece of the problem, but they're not talking together about an overall solution. And due to this level of complexity, that's why the only thing we have is these conversations. And the 6 of us having this conversation isn't going to make an impact, but 6 million of us having this conversation and deciding, hey, we think this is important enough that we need to influence that decision, that's when we really take back the power as the people of America, and as either homeowners or potential homeowners, and really have the opportunity to make a difference here.
Scott, a few years back, I know you guys are tired of hearing me say this, but I'm going to say it for our audience. A few years back, I coined this phrase when giving a speech to a very large group of real estate agents, which, by the way, before I give you this adage that I created a long time ago, for those of you listening on the phone here today, or on this session today, there are more real estate agents in America right now than there are single-family homes available for sale. If that doesn't describe for you a crisis, I don't know what would. We are going to fix this. We are with your help, but we are going to fix it. I coined this phrase many years ago. I know you guys are tired of me saying this, but in terms of policy in America, you are either at the table or you are on the menu, and that's just the way it works. If you don't weigh in, if you don't let your voice be heard, policy is going to be made, whether you like it or not, or whether you want to be involved or not. It is going to be made, and we can't go about this any longer without having the voice of the people be the most important component of policy making in America. It's not about, listening to the bankers. It's not about listening to the real estate companies. It's not about listening to the home builders, or it's about the consumer of America and getting their voice heard in a uniform fashion. And I'm telling you, it will move the needle on public policy.
Yeah, well, and I mean, that's because you and Tino have both, and Eric, you guys you're close to these policymakers. You've been involved in this process in your careers in the past, and you've had the ability to have access to these people and be able to influence these people to some extent. And so you're kind of our little starter core of the social proof that if you're passionate enough about these subjects, you can build up a loud enough voice so that you can make an influence. So hopefully we're the Chia Pet starting kit that we can pour some water on and grow this voice to be as big as we can, as fast as we can.
And step number 1 to that. So Phil and Tino are very serious about growing America's Homeowners Alliance. So it is important that we have these conversations. We get information and feedback from you, but we also bring information to you. But the conduit for action is actually AHA. Over in the chat, I've posted the link to myaaha.com. The actual link to join the America's Homeowners Alliance is there. So if you're watching this, you want to be part of it, you want your voice to be heard, you want the voice of other homeowners to be heard, go there and join, post a question. Let us know your thoughts, what's impacting you. We're running here on about 40 minutes. I don't know, Scott, how much longer you wanted to go today, but we really wanted to introduce the thoughts and ideas, introduce the 6 of us here, and have a plan moving forward to further the conversation and to get all of you involved so we can have a voice to affect positive change for homeowners and potential homeowners.
And Josh, let me just add to that one little piece of color. It is really important that we get testimonials from the consumer. We need examples of how things are being in your communities, in your neighborhood. We need those kind of examples that we can actually go tell members of Congress that we have examples in Cleveland or in Tucson or wherever it may be. So don't hesitate. Please give us your testimonials. We need those.
Well, and I can tell you, so when we built Forbearance Report, we built forbearancereport.org as a place for consumers to have a voice. We have almost 1,000 comments on there now from consumers. And I know for an absolute fact, I've received emails and we've received comments that I've sent out to you. I've sent to Eric and Brian and Phil and Tino. And we were able to connect these people with some of these heads of these servicers. And we were able to help individuals that were getting stonewalled going through normal channels. Now, this isn't an invitation to send us all of your problems, because it was a miracle that we were able to make the connections that we could, but it's indicative of the fact that if somebody has a voice and somebody can do something about it and cares enough, that we can get things done and we can accomplish things that you normally wouldn't think that you can accomplish. I think if anybody has any last words to say, I think we can wrap this one up. I think we did a good job of laying the groundwork on this. Phil, I'd like to address that document that AHA put out on how to fix the single-family housing crisis, because I thought it was really, really good. I'd love to unpack that next week and really talk about that and maybe discuss what those channels look like so that we can have those conversations and who we can get involved in those conversations, because it was really, really well put together and it was really well thought out. And it seems like some viable solutions are being presented there.
Yep, happy to.
All right, does anybody have anything else they want to chime in on before we let everybody off the hook this week?
I would just say, Phil, you would hit at the number. We just had the Fed's every 3 year survey of household finances. Homeowners have 60 times greater net worth than renters, and correlation does not equal causation, but 60% plus of that net worth is in home equity. So the vast majority of it is in your home equity. So it doesn't mean that everyone should own a home or that everyone has to own a home, but for the vast majority of Americans, it is the greatest source of their wealth, and we need to make it as available to as many people as possible who have earned that right. And we have people who are outside of the window and outside of the scope of being able to buy a home who have, by all means, earned the right in terms of savings, earning, building a good credit record.
Yes, and Scott, I'd like to end by just saying, this group of 6 people, we are going to make a difference. There is no option. This is a strategic imperative for America. And we are going to make a difference, but we need the voice of the consumer to be able to help us do that. We know the policy issues and we know the solutions, but we can't make those things happen without the voice of the people. This isn't just about inventory. It's about, credit and access and products and services and
building costs.
Closing costs, et cetera. And we plan to cover a number of these, the whole field for everyone. We're just thrilled to kick this off today.
All right.
It's a good spot to wrap it up.
Sounds like a dead spot. So we'll let it go. So gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. Those of you that watched this live and commented and reacted, thank you very, very much. We think that this is really, really important. We hope you do too. If you're watching this, check out myaha.com. That's where you can participate so your voice can be heard, because my AHA has access to policymakers. But Phil going out there knocking on the door and ranting like a lunatic is not as good as 5 or 6 million of us all shouting the same thing. we're going to be heard and we're going to be able to make change. So thank you, everybody. Thank you guys for joining this and participating in this. We'll see everybody in 2 weeks, and we look forward to continuing this conversation. So thank you very much.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Thank you, guys.